Genre movies in general, particularly horror movies, have historically not ever met with kind of universal acclaim. And then you get films where you something like Fight Club.
What the hell is film criticism?
Well, are you rolling?
He's rolling.
Oh, okay.
He's all rolling.
I've been rolling this time. Okay.
Yeah, the whole time.
Yeah, what was the question again?
What do you think film criticism is, and what are its values and its point?
It's a short question. I don't think there's a short answer to it, or even necessarily one answer. So this is what I think right now, and it's my opinion. I mean, I think good film criticism is not. It can be, but it is not limited to film reviews or reviewing films. It's writing about film. It's writing about the medium. It's writing about the industry. It's writing about film stars. It's writing about genre. It's writing about the entirety of film, and that can be specifically, or you're trying to do it all. And it is. I think it has to be done from a position of enthusiasm, love of what you're writing about, but also knowledge. And I'm not saying you need to go to film school to be a film critic, but I think you need to have a certain level of immersion in the medium before. And it doesn't need to be the whole thing. Like, there are some very, very fine genre critics, and like westerns or horror movies or science fiction is their thing, and don't know next to anything about Bollywood, for example. So I would not venture an opinion on a Bollywood film, because I don't understand how they work. From what I've seen, I'm like, this is something radically different from what I'm used to. I'm out of my comfort zone there. Now, I think it's important to challenge your comfort zone and sort of push that all the time. But I think a good film critic knows their sphere of knowledge and concentrates on that, whilst at the same time trying to build upon it as you go on. So I don't know. It's quite hard to define, but I think there's a difference between fandom writing and film criticism. They're not mutually exclusive, and they feed into one another. But I think a lot of what is called film criticism now is not really film criticism. It's personal not personal opinion, but it's fan writing. And one thing I hadn't mentioned now, it's the rise of the listicle. You used to read, say, Premiere or Empire or something, and you would get a nice article about, say, post-Vietnam, post-Watergate westerns, right? And it would be 2,000, 3,000 words written by someone in a kind of book format that placed everything in context and was a whole article. Now, you will get the top 10 post-Watergate westerns. Everything has become this kind of listicle thing, and it's just lists. It's just, here's a film, it's directed, here's the plot, it's quite good, it's quite bad, here's the next one, let's put them in order, boom. and people you have to recognize do seem to want to actually read that, because I guess it's easier to process mentally as a reader as well. You don't have to put any work in it. I think good film criticism there, maybe this will bring me something like a definition. It engages the mind, it engages the reader, and it asks the reader to put effort on their part into comprehension. And I think a lot of the stuff out there now is just BuzzFeed lists of stuff.
Which, of course, I mean, I guess is in part imposed by the natural format of online content, which is a very different way of formatting material. And continuity is something that we no longer look for in online writing.
You know, I read to anyone as their friends and people they work with, though, anyway. I mean, I think word of mouth is the single most important thing. It's what your friends, your family, your workmates went to see that weekend and told you was good, that is probably going to get more people into the cinema than anybody else. And I think knowing that, when we were talking about what's the purpose of criticism, then it's a slightly humbling thing, but it also frees you up to go, well, sod that. I'm just going to write about what I feel and think, and if you do it well enough and consistently enough, you know, and regularly enough, you will build an audience. And an audience might just be 15 people on Twitter, but those will be 15 people who actually your opinion is important to, you know, and that is like really good, and social media is really good for that. Just getting that kind of feedback, and you know, just in a sheer ego bath level, that's a nice warm fuzzy feeling when someone says, yeah, you know, you said I wasn't going to go see that, you said that was good, I saw it, yay, it was good, I really liked that, yes, you know, that feels like small victories, man.
I guess we're kind of done, except is there anything that we haven't addressed that you'd really like to get off your chest about film criticism, like anything really? I know that's a very open question, but it doesn't matter if there isn't anything. I might just like you're forced to respond, but
I don't know. I've been kind of thinking about it, and I think I probably have got my mini rants out of the way. I mean, I think that there is a lot of really bad writing about film out there at the moment, and there's unfortunately there's a lot of, because there's so many more voices. There are people who are, I think, quite what's the word, unfair to their audience, and my wife was just at the Edinburgh Film Festival.
Mm-hmm.
Right, she saw this film Maggie there, which is the Arnold Schwarzenegger indie zombie film.
Yeah.
And she really enjoyed it with some reservations, but she had been looking at reviews, and she'd found a review in a prominent film website that I won't name, which she just said, it was just every plot beat of the film, every plot beat, right up to the last 10 minutes in the review. And that's my main bugbear. I mean, I have complicated feelings about the whole spoiler thing. I think it can go too far the other way, and if we're talking about real film criticism, you know, you can't properly criticize, say, Citizen Kane without fully discussing the whole movie. But I think, you know, reviews casually giving away major plot developments and stuff. There's a backlash against spoilers at the moment. I don't know if you've noticed.
Well, I think that trailers spoil films, so I'm kind of like...
Well, that's always been the way, though. That has always been the way. Have you ever seen the original trailer for Night of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers?
No.
It's the whole movie!
Yeah.
It's the entire movie! It actually has the guy running down the street going, they're here, in the trailer, but the last scene in the film. So it's always been thus, and that's kind of irritating. But trailers are pure marketing, and I think when you get reviews like that, that's when they're just pure marketing as well.
I've got to say, I'm in a rather unpopular position here, but I think I understand that lots of people read reviews because they want to know if they should see a film, and I understand that's a function of reviews, but I personally think that the best criticism should be read after you've seen a film, not before.
I 100% agree with you there. I honestly, I probably go and see stuff that I want to see anyway. I might have a look at, I know as much as I have just been slating it, but I might get a general feel for something from, say, Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic. I might look at a star rating and read the last line, but I generally won't read the review until I've seen the film. Because then I'm kind of interested. Okay, well, I'm interested now in what you think, but I like to. I'm not the sort of person who reads the last chapter of a book first. I know there are people who do that. There's definitely a thing, and there must be a word for it, for sort of like phobia of suspense. But that does seem to be more and more prevalent. Just tell me. I don't want to be. I hate that. Some people just don't like that feeling. They want to know. But if you read any major consumer publication now, because there's so much stuff, when you'll get reviews that are like 50 words, maybe even less, and there's not a lot of criticism there. There's just this is a horror film. If you like horror films, like this film, then you might like it. 3 stars. And there's not a lot more than that. I think there's what I really liked. I mean, here's something that people don't maybe talk about much. I like reading film criticism. I sometimes like reading film criticisms more than I might like watching the movies. And one of the reasons that I wanted to write about film is because I grew up reading really good film writing that was really exciting, and what I would call film criticism, and that might be a couple of really influential things when I was growing up. One was it's not film criticism, but Hunter S. Thompson. I like that style. I like the whole Gonzo ethos, and I like the idea that just because you're writing about something, it doesn't need to be purely factual, or you put yourself into it and it should be entertaining. I think the film criticism version of that for me was Joe Bob Briggs. Joe Bob Briggs Goes to the Drive-In. Penguin put that out in the late 80s, and that was a huge book for me because here was this. It's a book of newspaper columns, about this thick. It's a really. I've got it in the bedroom still, and I look at it constantly, and I have still. 25 years later, maybe. I still haven't seen 95% of the films he talks about because they're rubbish, just rubbish. But it's brilliant, and the writing's fantastic, and the film doesn't need to be any good, and then there would be more kind of serious, right? I mean, Kim Newman Nightmare Movies was a huge book for me when I was a teenager. I've owned I think 3 editions of that. Still read Kim's writing because he's one of the the great genre critics. And there's that as well. So I like reading cultural writing and writing about culture, and I think it can be an end of itself. You can separate it from the subject and just say, actually, this is kind of artistic in its own way.
And one of the things, I mean, apart from the merits that it has as a piece of writing in itself, and apart from consumer guidance, what are the kind of things that film criticism delivers? Like, what does film criticism do that, say, a review doesn't? I think you're drawing a distinction between reviews and criticism. Yeah.
Well, yes, some. I mean, some reviews. I think. Well, criticism is the key word, and I think if there's an issue now, it's that people don't understand what that word means. They think it means 31 Reasons the True Detective season 2 episode 1 sucked. And that's not criticism. I think what we're looking for is informed writing in a historical that can place film in a historical context, with some examination of theme and subtext and an understanding of the language of film, which I think is what should differentiate good film criticism from literary criticism. And I think there is an issue with a lot of the more serious highbrow film criticism, in that actually a lot of those guys are literature critics. And I think that is where a lot of this stuff about story arcs and 3-act structures and all this sort of thing that people relentlessly carp on about comes from. And it kind of negates a lot of, actually, films are primarily visual medium. Obviously, the writing is really important, the structure is really important, but it is a visual medium. It's not the same as reading a book. You're reading a novel, you have to create that novel, you have to create the world in your head. You don't generally have to do that with film, because it's on the screen. That has been done for you. And there's a lot of film criticism that just completely ignores the visual aspects of the medium and just goes, I think genre fans feel this a lot because, I choose my words carefully, because I love genre film and I think it can be just as good as any AAA Oscar winning whatever, if not better. But sometimes you have to make allowances watching genre films for certain things. Sometimes they're to do with the genre. If Roger Corman films from the 60s, there needs to be an exploding helicopter and there needs to be a pair of boobs at one point, right? It's not really fair to pull out a film produced by Roger Corman from that period and go, well, this is being a bit sexist because of this scene, because that's almost an industrial requirement that be there. Or if you watch like really good, I think when I first discovered John Woo films, the first one I saw was The Killer, and it absolutely blew me. I'd never seen anything like this. I came out of that raving to people, flatmates at university, saying that this is the most amazing action film I've ever seen. And then I would show it to some people, and they would go, "Oh, what? And what? I just can't get past the cheesy music, and it's so sentimental and all this sort of stuff." And first off, the sentimental aspects of those John Woo films, the reason I'm watching them, because I love that. But Hong Kong films of that period did tend to have kind of the soundtracks were never all that great, so you have to make some allowances there. Or if you're watching a sort of prime classic era Argento, or maybe one of the slightly later ones, something like opera. If you were going to examine opera from a purely literary kind of criticism sort of a way, opera has serious deficiencies. Right? I think even in film criticism, opera has some deficiencies. But if you're just going to view it and say, well, does this make narrative sense? Do the characters make sense? Is it structured well? Does it have 3 acts? What's the character? If that's all you're going to examine that film for, you will come to the conclusion that you're watching a piece of crap. And I do not think that opera is a piece of crap. And I don't think that any really good film critic would look at that film and think that. To sort of hark back to things that were very formative, anyone I think of my age who grew up in this country who's really into film will have watched Alex Cox's Moviedrome from the late 80s, which was a season of curated cult movies, when that term actually meant something. that would be given a top and tail introduction by Alex Cox, the director of Repo Man, and he wouldn't choose the films, which was really important. He wouldn't choose the films, but he would. So sometimes he'd have to talk about something he clearly didn't like, but he would always find something of interest, even in something like Vamp, which was a film that I can't stand Vamp, and he clearly hated it. But he was like, well, yeah, but the editing on this, or the cinematography, or really what they've done with the key lighting in this scene is really interesting. So I think really good in-depth film criticism is looking at the whole of a film in its entirety and talking about it in its entirety. So what's good, what works, what's bad, what doesn't work, but in the context of film as a visual medium, and put into kind of a historical context of what has come before, with some knowledge. And I think there's a lot of stuff out there now where you'll read something about, I don't know, a new Western or whatever, and you get the suspicion that the person has maybe never seen The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance or The Searchers or something. It doesn't have, people are like sometimes raving about something because they simply don't know the history of what's come before.
I guess given what you said right at the very beginning of this interview, about you're thinking that the one thing that critics can't do is inform a reader as to whether they will enjoy a film or not. I guess partly because of that, perhaps the one thing you've sort of not discussed and I'm really glad you haven't actually, but the one thing you haven't discussed in talking about film criticism is sort of the role of evaluation, like determining whether a film is good or bad, that kind of language.
Yeah.
And I wonder where you think evaluation fits into the kind of scheme of film criticism, and also more specifically what you think about star ratings or their equivalent.
Yeah. Well, I think evaluation has to come into it, but it's in the context of it being an opinion as well, and also I'm old enough now to have seen films and remember films being commercial and critical disasters that have in my lifetime become classics of cinema. So there is something to be said about the necessity of reflection and passage of time to change how a film is perceived. So the review written sometimes the hour after you've seen a film, I think that the whole rise of the first look review is something that really irritates me. It's like first out the gate, everyone, it's like, wow, look, the first review of Batman versus Superman. Well, great, you're going to get a lot of hits of that, that's why people do them, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's any good. It doesn't mean that you actually have a handle on a film. Sometimes you do need to sit on stuff and let it percolate. And some of my favourite films are things that I may not have liked coming out of the cinema, or I may not have understood coming out of the cinema, or hitting, turning it off on TV or whatever when I watch the DVD or whatever. And I think the reviewing side of things, the downside of that is that it's all now. It's just the now. It's like, what's out this week? What's out this week? What's out this week? And you don't necessarily have people going back in 6 months later and going, well, or you do, everyone, because you have your top 10 at the end of the year. But it's always rather interesting how those tend to, crystallize around a canon of films that have almost all come out in the last 4 months. It's the same with awards season.
Yeah.
Star ratings. Actually, might we get a glass of water?
Please do. I'm joking. Are you okay?
No, I'm all right. I'm just it's just under the lights. It's a little bit of dry throat. So
I'm really sorry.
No, it's perfectly fine. I just
They can stop the interview anytime you like. No problem at all.
Anyone else?
You got plenty of
I'm
tape.
fine, thank you.
I'm cool, thank you. Plenty of tape.
Hmm?
Have we got plenty of tape? It's cool.
I should say, Stuart, since you mentioned Kim Newman and Nightmare Movies, we're actually interviewing Kim Newman later today. So it's you and him today. You're the. So it's you.
If you don't do star ratings, you can't get in Rotten Tomatoes and you can't get on Metacritic. And there's various other hoops you have to jump through if you're interested in that to get on Rotten Tomatoes. But the fundamental one is if you don't do star ratings, you're not going to go into that database. And a lot of people, I think, access film reviews. If they do access film reviews, they don't necessarily go to the Guardian site or the Telegraph or the Times or Hey You Guys or anyone. They go to Rotten Tomatoes. They go to Top Critics. They read the basically the line, and some pithy quote catches their eye. Then they click the link to the review and read it. So that is a really big thing, and I'm that's where I start to think that there's a problem developing, because I think from a writing point of view, I hope that the stuff I write is interesting and entertaining, but ultimately I hope that people are actually reading it. And I think if you've got star reviews on stuff, I think you can pretty much take 60% of your hits or reported readership level and just ignore them, because they're not reading your review. They're just going to the one-line summary at the bottom and the star rating, and they're off. So I understand why star ratings are there, and we've now got in a position where I simply don't think you can commercially survive as a cultural publication without them, because you're denying yourself publicity by not having them. But I don't know if they're really a particularly good thing. I try not to take them seriously too much, because I think that whole process of reflection. I've given 5-star ratings to movies, and then at the end of the year, when you're sort of looking back on stuff, you've maybe got the Blu-rays come out and you watch it again and you're like, yeah, I'm not so sure. that was the one of the best things I've ever seen. I think maybe that was the 4-star movie, or or maybe I was in a really good mood, or maybe I saw that on like a killer fucking THX IMAX screen and the Dolby Atmos, and like I was in a really good mood that day, And the other thing about them is, I think with a lot of stuff these days now, it's either the worst or it's the best. It's either the worst or it's the best. It's either 1-star piece of shit, 5-star amazing. I thought, I don't know whether it's coming out, but the current big movie in the cinemas is, it probably will still be the biggest movie in the cinemas in a year's time, given how much money it's making, is Jurassic World, right? But the reviews of Jurassic World have been bonkers if you just look at the star ratings, because that is the perfect example of, it's either a 1-star piece of crap terrible movie, or it's 5-star spectacle right of the year. This is the best blockbuster in years. And I honestly think most people will see that film, have a good time, and think, yeah, that was decent. I went to see it the other week and it was like, yeah, I think I have some issues with that film. But it was quite entertaining. 3 stars. That's just not going to go on the poster. Yeah. I quite liked it. 3 stars.
I think it was after I saw Die Hard 4.
Yeah.
And gave it 5 stars. That's the last time I gave 5 stars to a new film, because I realised this is just ridiculous. It makes no sense.
Well, I insist that admission makes it into the final cut.
It's true too, and I remember my editor questioned it, and I said, how dare you question the stars I put? It's like, this is Die Hard 4.
Even Len Wiseman has his fans.
Whereas now, with Rotten Tomatoes, you can link reviews to Rotten Tomatoes that don't have their own star rating, but you have to give it a rotten or a fresh tomato. You have to fit to the scheme of Rotten Tomatoes itself. You can also add your own star ratings, but
Yeah.
once you do that, I find there are very few films. This is really me rather than the world of cinema, but very few films to which I'll give a Rotten Tomato, because I don't want to tell people not to see a film.
Well,
Rarely.
I've seen a few reviews lately on Rotten Tomatoes where I've read them and thought, that's not a Rotten Tomato, or that's not a threat. That's like, they seem to have a problem with reviews that kind of are on that not exactly ambiguous, but I mean, I think generally there are films out there that like are a long way from perfect, but are still very, very interesting, and some of those movies, I think, mainstream film reviewing in general seems to be having some issues with. The one that really springs to mind this year for me is Chappie. I don't know if you saw Chappie.
I saw Chappie last week.
Right.
And,
Now, I think Chappie is the quintessential 3-star movie, in that but it's a really interesting film.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff in that film which just doesn't work at all. And then there's stuff that doesn't work in a tremendously interesting way. And then there's a bunch of stuff that really, really works. And it is a movie at a scale, that scale these days. I think Hollywood in general, the studio system is becoming increasingly risk averse. I think that's obvious to everyone, and they are focusing more and more on very kind of tried and trusted formulas. And then you see something like Chappie, and Chappie's a bit of an oddball as a film. It's this strange mix of, on the one hand, you've got a kids movie, very obviously a kids movie, and then it's mixed in with this really bloody, bone-crunching Paul Verhoeven style violence. And I think I can't remember, maybe it was Robbie Collin, someone like that, had described it as actually no. A general criticism I saw people saying at the time was, it's like RoboCop meets Short Circuit. And the weird thing about Chappie is that's exactly what it's like, but that's interesting, not a reason to go, oh, this is rubbish. So I think Rotten Tomatoes has a bit of a hard time dealing with some of those, and in genre in general as well. You'll look at horror movies, and you'll have a couple of horror movies a year, like The Babadook or It Follows, most recently, that cross over into the mainstream and get across the board really good reviews. But they're kind of rare. What you'll generally get is you'll get a film like a good example for me is No One Lives, right? Which came out to particularly in America. I think it was on like a 12, somewhere between 10 and 25% on Rotten Tomatoes. So like derision. I think that's a pretty good B movie. I think on its exploitation terms, I think that's quite a good film. But genre movies in general, particularly horror movies, have historically not, ever met with kind of universal acclaim. And then you get films where you that are something like Fight Club. When Fight Club came out, Fight Club got tremendously polarized reactions. There were people who loved it, and then there were people, and we're not talking that it was more extreme than the everything. It's either the best or it's the worst. It was people loved the film, people detested the film and wanted the filmmakers locked up. That when you feed that into the number crunching machine of something like Rotten Tomatoes, you end up with lukewarm war. Just like, So I think if there's an enemy of sort of like good film criticism at the moment, it's the aggregator sites, because I think they're just kind of compressing everything and flattening it out, and it's all turning into mush.
Although, if you ignore the tomato meter, they're really, really useful. I mean, they're great as aggregators. They're just not great as crunching valuation, because that's sort of meaningless.
Well, that and Metacritic, I think, is a little bit better. They seem to be a little bit less best or worse, but they're all the same. But they are kind of useful for a snap judgment. I mean, I can't deny that. But I think as the be all and end all of criticism, I don't think they're great.
Yeah. No, I just think they're useful for banking links to reviews, so that you can very easily find a series of reviews in one place.
That's certainly true. Yeah. That's certainly true. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I completely agree about the tomato meter. Who gives a shit? But okay. Changing the subject completely.
Okay.
How? I mean, I guess you're saying really that you started up writing sort of properly after your student experience in sort of 2008. I think you said.
Well, no, that was I graduated in 1998, and that was the second degree. 2008 was Fright Fest.
Yeah,
and that was kind of a catalyst to sort of like start sort of writing about films again. Yeah. Just getting interested and not just being a passive. No, I don't like the word passive for the process of watching films, but just a film fan.
But from a point of view of someone who writes about film, how has it changed? How's the landscape changed? Not film, but the film criticism and the kind of media landscape in which we write now.
Well, I'm coming from a position of not being a professional film critic ever. So I guess I am an enthusiastic hobbyist who's managed to parlay that into getting paid for the occasional review. So I can't tell you about what's changed on Fleet Street or the decline of the glossy film magazine any more than just anyone can from browsing the shelves of W.H. Smith and wondering where all the stuff I used to read is gone. I guess what I can say is, from 2008, it seems that there is more and more and more and more and more stuff online about film, and it's just increasing at an exponential rate. And also podcasts. I have to say, the thing that most excites me about films at the moment is actually it's the Bret Easton Ellis podcast, which is by far the best thing on film in any medium right now is that series of podcasts, which is fantastic, and he's asking really interesting questions, and a lot of the stuff we're sort of talking about, and then beyond on sort of the structures of Hollywood. But the certainly there are more and more websites, there are more and more blogs. It's easier and easier, and there's been a democratizing process of getting your words online. It is making it harder to get people to read them because there's so much noise, and it's so difficult to filter that out. But in terms of structured, curated, properly edited outlets, it seems to me that they are in decline at the moment. We've got a rise of a kind of single voice medium where it's my blog. I have my blog, and in general, everything on my blog is what I've written into a computer, and I hit post and it's there. The idea that there is a curated magazines or even curated websites, they seem to be in decline, I think. And I'm not really sure what the long-term effect of that is going to be. There's always going to be film criticism. There's always going to be a need for the New York Times or the Guardian or whatever to have film reviews. I don't think that's particularly going to change. Although the experience last year of the Independent on Sunday would suggest that maybe that's not even that secure, when they basically fired all their arts critics overnight and then just started pulling stuff off the wires, and now it's just rubbish, you know. So I think there's more people writing about it, there's more voices, there's more stuff, but it is becoming ever more about fan culture, and that is great. And I'm not critical of that. Fan writing can have really good writing, but I think it is quite it's quite open to manipulating by corporate interests, and I think this goes right through from fan writing to the remaining glossy magazines. Is they seem to be getting much narrower in the range of material they cover. It's not just that it's always been primarily American films, but now it's not even American indies. It's narrowing down to a smaller number of tentpole films every year, you know, and they tend to be the big franchise ones. You can now have a $150 million tentpole genre film open and not get on the cover of anything because it's not Marvel or DC or Disney. I thought that was kind of noticeable last year with Edge of Tomorrow. Huge, I don't know how much that cost, but at least $150 million, right? It's like Tom Cruise film, and I didn't get on the cover of anything. Film subsequently didn't do that well. I think they, you know, there were. I think a film not getting on the cover of Empire is probably got not that much to do with its international box office at the end of the day, but it does. I think if it didn't get on the cover of Empire, then it shows that there's a deeper issue with the amount of conviction the studio is pursuing the marketing of that particular product. So yeah, if it's changed, it's there's more people, it's more democratic, but it is, I think, harder to get your words to an audience simply because there's so much of it, which is why cases back to star ratings and getting into Rotten Tomatoes is important for people, because as you say, that collects together a lot of reviews, and certainly if you link your if you can't get on Rotten Tomatoes, the one thing you can do is get your review linked on IMDb, you know, and you'll usually see a scramble of sites trying to make sure they get on there first, because they don't alphabetize it. It's just, you know, if you be the first one, you get loads and loads of hits. And what generally people are interested in, loads and loads of hits, it's going to be about, you know, your big tentpole movies. It's not going to be about, you know, Slow West or some independent movie or something like that.
My last question, and I've got to preface this by saying I'm not being disingenuous here. I don't read a huge amount of criticism written by other people, because I don't have time, right? But but I read what you write. And so I'm asking this question with the greatest of respect to you as a writer, because you're a writer who I genuinely do respect, right?
Yeah.
So just so you know where I'm coming from, and that it's not an aggressive question or anything, right? But but should the views of like a professional critic, by which I mean a paid critic, so I guess broadly not you, right? That's really what I'm saying. Given that you're a representative of a passion, you described yourself as a hobbyist, and you're sometimes paid, which really is true of everyone. Like no one's paid all the time except the people who write for the papers. But but you know you're a hobbyist, and you're, I think, quite content to be a hobbyist, and you're doing this out of passion for the medium. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair enough characterization of your position?
Yes.
Okay, so given that, why should, or indeed should, the views of a professional or a paid critic be valued more than yours? Should they be valued more? And if so, what gives them the edge?
I think I don't. I'm the same. I don't read a vast amount of film criticism. partly because I don't have the time, and also because I think when you are sort of you're writing it, it's like anything else. If you talk to novelists, or you talk to a comic book writer, or you talk to a screenwriter, and you ask them, do you read a lot of other people's work, and you'll often hear people say, I try to avoid that because I don't want it to influence me, so I almost never read reviews of anything I'm going to write a review of. I try. It's impossible to not get a feel for the buzz around certain films. But I try to sort of remain a part of that, so I can, as best as possible, give an honest appraisal of something. So there's a film out this week that I really didn't like, but everyone else does like, and I was, I knew this particular film had a certain level of buzz because it had won some awards, but I wrote that review. I don't know, could I say, if I had known when I wrote that review that literally every other person in the country was going to say this was one of the films of the year, would I have been quite as acerbic? I don't know. I hope so. I mean, I hope I've got enough of my own convictions, but at the same time, you try not to be too influenced. But what I do find is that there are a few people who I do read and I do pay attention to. And I said, I can't tell you whether you're going to enjoy a film. That's not strictly true. I think if you could build up a relationship with a particular film writer or critic, and by relationship I simply mean you read their work. Mm-hmm. You can build up a relationship, and then you develop a sense of their taste. So, if you listen to Mark Kermode, or you read Peter Bradshaw, or you read Robbie Collin, there are certain, like Bradshaw is really good on comedy, right? He's a really good critic about comedy. He gives American studio comedies more time than other critics. So if Bradshaw says a comedy is like a good film, like a new Will Ferrell movie is like thumbs up from Bradshaw, I'll be like, okay, I might go see that one. Or Kermode, who has come out of kind of a background of writing about horror, but he and Nigel Floyd have a very kind of amusing sort of we've seen all that now attitude. So there are certain films that either Nigel or Mark Kermode might not like in that genre. Say something like Insidious. Neither of them liked Insidious. I really like Insidious, and I'll be like, well, I'm gonna give that a time of it, because even though I really like those critics and they didn't like that film, I have a certain feel for that, and I think that is maybe where an established name has more weight than just some person on the internet, because you have a relationship and you have a feel for their taste, and Joe blogs online saying, Ant-Man sucks, or Ant-Man is the most amazing thing ever, and okay, it's not out for 3 months or whatever, but you know what I mean. I'm not gonna give that necessarily as much stock. You've seen The Waterman?
I have.
Right.
Another one.
Okay. I gotta tell you, I can't think of a single interesting thing to say about that movie, and I've got a review to write, so I just went off on a stream of consciousness. But it's really got nothing to do with the movie,
Yeah.
That's why people say bad reviews are easier to write than good reviews, because actually you don't have to. If you get a really shitty film, there's most of them. There's not a lot you have to say. It's just say, look, this is a bad movie. The script's shit, the acting's terrible, the special effects aren't good, and the plot's rubbish. I got 500 more words. Let's have some jokes. You just sort of riff and stuff. And
there's nothing with which to engage.
There's nothing with which to engage. So they're very easy to write. And then you'll get something like. Actually, maybe not the best example, because I wrote a review of this film an hour after I saw it. But you get, say, a film like The Master. I want to do a proper review of The Master. You can't just, bang it out. Except I did, because I was. But that was because that film put me in a certain excited frame of mind. But, a really good movie. You've got to kind of sometimes. Those are the really hard ones, because you're trying to properly articulate why something is really interesting. Something like The Duke of Burgundy, putting down in words why that film is interesting is a lot harder and more challenging than why Waterman is not.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, absolutely.
I do think we're in a different place with the medium of film now than we were, say, 20 years ago, and I think part of that is technological. But people are talking a lot about the decline of physical media like DVD and Blu-ray, and forgetting that I can remember when there wasn't any of this stuff at all. I can remember my dad coming home with a VHS recorder for the first time, and I can remember what watching films was like before that, when there was no physical media, that you couldn't go to the shop and rent a movie, you couldn't stream anything, and a film came out, it played for a week, and it was gone, and then it was 4 years later, it might turn up on TV and it'd have ads in it and it might be cut. And so I have, got caught up in the kind of apocalyptic predictions that everyone is very fond of just now, as much as anybody else. But at the end of the day, if film is going to go back, well, maybe not back, but if film is becoming a more niche activity, and I think it possibly is. I think it has, but I think this is across the culture. I think this is books, this is TV, this is comic books, this is everything. There is more access to everything now, and that means that people can seek out their own kind of personal tastes a lot more than they once could. That is making everything a niche activity, and if film is becoming something more like ballet or opera in terms of having a small and dedicated audience, I'm okay with that. I don't really have a big problem with that. I think, what you're talking about is the great big multi-million-dollar studio films, and these are, I think another thing important is that these aren't, on a fundamental level, these things aren't films, in a way. The film is just one part of a branding exercise that goes across the Happy Meal, the product placement tie-in, the T-shirt, the mug, the lunchbox, and that process has been going. That goes back beyond Star Wars. That just goes back and back. That's culture. And, crass commercialism and culture go together like chocolate and peanut butter, really. So, in terms of the idea that, there's just not... films are getting worse, or they're not as intelligent, or everything was so great in the 1970s, and, most of my favourite American films are from the 1970s, but... There are loads and loads of really shit movies released in the 1970s that everyone forgets, because, they're just a load of garbage and airport sequels and just junk. I'm not sure there's any more or less junk versus any more or less intelligent films around now than there ever has been. I just think maybe sometimes that it feels like it because the big films kind of suck up the oxygen of publicity so effectively, and there are small films that are really good that are just kind of slipping through the cracks, and I think there's probably an issue, and that's outside the scope of what we're talking about, as to whether you can actually make a living now making independent films, any more than you can make a living as a film critic, you know, and that's interesting, and perhaps, but that's a subject for another documentary, really. I think.
Yeah.
To be honest, I think we've actually lost some of the curational aspects of this. What you've now got, and it's not really a case of this has got worse or this has got better, just that things have changed. Because I don't want to present how things were in the 1980s when I sort of like came of age as a film fan as some sort of golden age. And particularly as a fan of horror films. And in this country, I saw a bunch of quote unquote, well, you know, of actual video nasties in the classic way of friend having a 5th generation VHS bootlegs that his older brother had got hold of and watching that and sort of like fiddling around with the tracking every 5 minutes to try and get through it, and that had it. There's a lot of bullshit nostalgia going around about that period, and when you go back and I could not fucking watch a 5th generation VHS bootleg of Zombie Flesh Eaters now, right? Especially now that there is a Blu-ray out. The first time I watched the Arrow Blu-ray release of Zombie Flesh Eaters, I thought I was watching a different movie, right? Because it was the first time I'd ever seen it correctly presented in scope, and the opening New York Bay sequence was gorgeous. It was just beautiful looking. It looked like a film. It was really well directed. It was really beautifully framed and edited and shot, and it was just like, this is not the movie I remember. The movie I remember was an amusing piece of shit.
Yeah.
And actually, it's not that at all. Now, Zombie Flesh Eaters, I'm not the world's biggest Fulci fan, and I think the film as a whole is what we were saying before. You make allowances. There are serious. If you're gonna look in terms of narrative and plot development and character arcs, that's a load of shot. But visually, wow, it's a fantastic looking film, and it's got incredible moments. So I don't want to present that as as some sort of golden age, because actually I wouldn't want to go back there. But what you did get was you would have something like Moviedrome, or you would I discovered Sergio Leone because BBC Two did a Sergio Leone season over one Christmas. I remember another time they did a Hitchcock, and I just watched maybe 10 Hitchcock films in 5 days over the Christmas break. Just like, wow. That's sort of gone there, and now I certainly find myself flicking through Netflix, and there's just hundreds and hundreds, and then spending half an hour and ending up not watching anything at all, you know?
Yeah.
So I think curation, I think there's a real need for curation. If there's something I really regret looking around, I really hope the Regent Street cinema that's just opened is doing this, but there's been a real decline of rep cinema, and I saw so much when I first was a student in Edinburgh at the Cameo and the Edinburgh Film House. I'd see late night double bills, I'd see like lots of rep films, and that's kind of declined because now you can just buy the DVD or watch it on Netflix, or if it's out of public domain, just watch the thing on YouTube, you know?
Yeah.
And it's impossible to just watch all this stuff. So I think, curation is a good thing, and I sort of I miss that. The algorithm is no substitute for a real person and the taste of an actual person to pick, say, 10 films and say, here, these are good, you should watch these, and here's why. Instead, you've got a computer algorithm that's going, okay, you watch this, then you might like this. leading to, you know, me flicking through Netflix and getting to, you know, romantic movies. And so, okay, what's in romantic movies? Because, you know, and, Tyrannosaur.